Greetings, greenhouse people, and welcome to another installment of Tech on Demand, where our goal is always to bring you tips, tricks, and information to produce your best crops ever. I'm your host, Bill Calkins, and I am thrilled to be joined once again by Dr. Will Healy, the Senior Technical Manager for Ball Horticultural Company. On the agenda today is Impatiens, sort of the rock stars of the shade color garden, and very, very important to customers around the world who love this beautiful crop. We're kind of past the blip where we had no impatiens for a few years, which is exciting. And I think everybody down the entire supply chain is excited about that. And we're into a new era of high resistant varieties. But our job as growers is to eliminate sporulation and send clean crops to market. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Just a quick reminder, we do have a lot of resources already about impatiens, all the way from videos talking about the resurgence of impatiens and these new high resistant varieties, all the way to grower guidelines and specific recommendations for creating fungicide rotations. But we're going to touch on it again today because it's important and we're into a new season. And these are just things that we need to continue to reiterate and work with our teams to make sure that we're sending the best crops out the door. So, Will, why don't you go ahead and share your screen, and take us through the disease triangle and a little bit about downy mildew as a disease, and then we will specifically get into impatiens.
Great. Well, thanks, Bill, for hosting this today, because having impatiens back in the garden center, and more importantly in the garden, is probably one of the most exciting things that's going to happen this year. We've got a lot of gardeners who are kind of new to it because impatiens really haven't been around for the last, let's say, probably 4 or 5 years because of all of the issues with basically impatiens downy mildew at retail and then dying in the garden. But with the new genetics from both Syngenta, the Amara XDR, and the Beacon from Pan American Seed, we now have a high resistant impatiens that basically will survive. I've had them in my garden. Other people have had them in their garden, and they've been rock stars, as you mentioned, throwing great color in the garden all season long. Whereas when you have susceptible varieties, like some of the old varieties, you basically found that sometime between July 1st and September 1st, they pretty much bit the dust, and you ended up with sticks in a pot. So I think what we're going to try to do is remind people, based on last year's experience where we saw a resurgence of impatiens, and this year I expect to have even more impatiens being grown, is just to kind of give a refresher on why do we need to do what we need to do. So let's start out with the whole risk management and understanding and minimizing crop failure. Because remember, it's about having the plant, the pathogen, and the environment or cultural program. Basically, it's a disease triangle. You have one of those things not right or not present, you don't have a problem. So let's get into this. One of the important things, which is different than some of our other high at-risk crop videos, has been that we actually have got high resistant varieties to work with, which is a great addition to our toolbox in controlling this disease. Amara XDR, Beacon impatiens from Pan American Seed are both high resistant to the impatiens downy mildew disease. But a clean production facility is important. Do not have any impatiens that you save from year to year. There's just a carrier, a reservoir of the impatiens downy mildew. So make sure that you don't have impatiens around. You don't have them outside. You don't have them inside the greenhouse. Make sure that you really retool your cultural protocols. It's not complicated. It's the beauty of impatiens. But make sure that you've got a feed program, a watering program, and a spray program in place to basically grow the crop. We're going to talk a lot about the right chemical at the right time. This is the biggest mistake we saw last year. Growers were using the wrong chemical, or they were spraying it or drenching it on at the wrong time. So we really need to focus on the right chemical at the right time. And this is one of those diseases that we have a lot of oops. I think most of my calls last year were oops, crisis, I've got downy mildew. So get out there, monitor it. You've got baskets hanging up, you've got stuff on the floor that it's hard to get down there and look, because remember, downy mildew is hard to find until you've got clouds of white floating through the greenhouse. And at that point, it's too late. This is not a curative disease. It has to be handled as preventative. You've got to prevent the infection to basically control the disease. So let's get into our favorite disease, which is impatiens downy mildew. So let's first of all, let's just do a quick update on it. Remember, powdery mildew is on the upper leaf surface predominantly. Downy mildew is on the bottom of the leaf. There's a lot of plants that do have downy and powdery, but in this case, impatiens downy mildew is only, is on impatiens, and it's only on the undersides of the leaves. There are different mildews. So there's basal downy mildew, which we've talked about in another at-risk podcast. And that is one genus, Peronospora, which is different than impatiens. Pansy downy mildew shares the same genus, Peronospora, but they're different species. This is the key on downy mildews. They're host specific. If you have all kinds of downy mildew on your basil, don't worry about it. It's not going to get on your impatiens, but do worry about it on your basil. The same with pansies. So just let's keep it straight. This isn't like a botrytis where it can go onto everything. It's got to be very specific. So scout your impatiens. Let's talk about the whole terminology, because we're going to throw some new terminology out there that you may not be aware, remember, and it's called there's susceptibility to a disease, there's high resistance to a disease, and there's immunity to a disease, meaning it can't get it. Susceptible, the older varieties, all of the older genetics that have been around prior to about 2 years ago are susceptible to impatiens downy mildew. Remember, it is specific to Impatiens walleriana, which are the garden impatiens, and the fiestas, roccapolo. These are vegetative Impatiens wallerianas. Those are all highly susceptible to impatiens downy mildew. This on the picture on the left is, of course, a good example of what happens when you put a susceptible variety in a high disease pressure area. They get impatiens downy mildew, they defoliate, and you end up with stick in the ground. You have Beacon, Imara, which have high resistance. High resistance only means that they don't die. They can have powdery mildew. You can flock them like a Christmas tree with downy mildew spores, but they don't die. This is really important. Immune means that, because remember, host specific, marigolds cannot host impatiens downy mildew. So you're not going to see it on there. So if we just give a real quick overview, you can get it, impatiens downy mildew, in both susceptible and high resistant, but you can't get it on other crops. Now, why is that important? Is because this was the problem people missed last year. They grew some susceptible varieties for colors, and they had high resistance because they wanted to do a good thing. But all of a sudden they had spores, and you can't ship spores to retail. Crops were rejected at retail. So that's why we're really focusing on this. Remember, the right culture is important. Regular fertilization is very important, not excessive, but just regular fertilization. Make sure that you're dry at night. Remember, impatiens are water machines. They're continuously moving water. So you've got this continuous flow of water through the plant. So that's that guttation. If you come out in the morning and you see plants that are wet, the plants have been gone into the night too wet, so that you've gotten all night long, you've had high humidity because the plants are pushing that water out, the little pores at the end of the leaf. So it's very important to make sure that you ventilate and keep that humidity down so that they are dry in the morning. Worst thing in the world is wet foliage. If you go and you water your plants and they're not drying within about a half hour to an hour, get a leaf blower out there and just blow the water off of them, because water on the foliage is a problem. Make sure that you try to keep that humidity under 80%, and let's get a fungicide rotation. So let's talk about risk management, because this is really what it's all about. If you don't spray, there's a number of growers that don't spray for a number of different reasons. If you have you're growing vegetative doubles, that is a very high risk crop, high risk environment and scenario. So you're standing a high risk of having impatiens downy mildew because they're susceptible. If you have mixed plantings where you've got some vegetative crops hanging up in baskets, you've got some susceptible varieties on the ground, and you've got some high resistant varieties like beacon sitting right next to them. That is a cauldron of opportunity for the disease to get started and spread spores everywhere. That is a high risk environment. If you only have beacon, we had a number of growers that had no vegetative impatiens, and they only grew beacon. They basically had a very managed and no disease pressure on that. Even though they didn't spray, they were very successful. So that really is that managed risk, the idea that you basically eliminate susceptible varieties from your program. You can basically get away with no spray. The best scenario that we recommend is that you have an integrated control strategy of the right environment plus a fungicide spray program. That way you can grow the vegetative doubles, you can have your color range using susceptible varieties, and you can use the high resistant varieties that are out there. Again, the most managed risk, the greatest reduced risk is when you only grow beacon and you put a spray on it, which then ensures that once it gets to retail, it's still going to be spore free. So let's talk about some spray programs. You basically have got a young plant strategy, and in a minute we'll talk about a finished strategy. There's really, because of crop time and timing, because you need to have a certain amount of time between applications, there's only really 3 treatment periods that you can do in a young plant. The most critical is the treatment 1, which occurs as soon as the roots start elongating out of the cutting or the roots come out of the seedling, because these are applied as a drench. And so you need to have roots to take it up and get that on there usually about 10 to 14 days once you start having roots out into the soil. Basically, you could use one of the Adorn and plus Protect in the US. In Canada, it's not labeled. So the combination spray of Adorn plus Subdue Max is basically available both in the US and Canada, and look at that. Another strategy is use K-Fight. It's one of the phosphorus fungicides, very effective, plus Subdue, because Subdue is the systemic. Inside, the K-Fight is the topical outside. So you get inside-out control in case you got spores coming in. If you don't have the crop time, then we omit the treatment number 2, which basically you're doing about 14 days after the treatment number 1. The most important is treatment number 3. If you're not going to do anything but one treatment, make sure you do the treatment number 3, which you do before you transplant or before you ship. And in that case, you may want to apply Segovis if you're in the US, or you use the Adorn Subdue or the K-Fight plus Subdue if you're in Canada or the US, and apply that as a drench so that you have control until the plants are established. And once they're established in the finished container, basically once they've rooted out, you can put another treatment on if you wish. If your crop time is fast, then you may want to skip number 2. But if all of a sudden you're going to have to hold them because the weather turns against you, it gets dreary, the market gets cold, so it slows down, you may want to put on that treatment 2. And of course, the most important, again, is that treatment 3 in finished production. Our first choice in the US is to put Segovis on it because of its long-term residual in the garden. So you get consumer benefit. Again, using the Adorn Subdue in the US, or the K-Fight plus Subdue, and then use the appropriate Canadian chemicals. Remember, always use fungicides according to the label instructions in your particular location. So remember, good culture plus the appropriate fungicide. And if you're only going to do one fungicide, get that last number 3 on those plants to give you self-protect control. We have a lot of information available to help you get your Impatiens program restarted. Todd Cavins did a great Impatiens 2.0 in the break room series. It gives you everything you need to know on growing from culture and disease control. If you basically want more background information on Impatiens, Downy, and Mildew, the Bulb Plant Disease Diagnostic Group has written a great fungicide information, very detailed, what their trials have shown. And then finally, if you want to basically mix and match and create your own program of sprays and drenches, there's a program here on creating your own Impatiens, Downy, Mildew control program. So Bill, is there any other resources that they might want to be interested in?
Well, I just want to reiterate that the In the Break Room series covers so many different topics that are excellent training tools for you and your team. The grower guidelines that we'll reference, put together by our plant diagnostics group, are very thorough. They were updated, they're continuously updated, and are full of charts and information to help you put together that comprehensive control program. And the video that Will and I did last year about sort of how to interpret this fungicide rotation program and put it to work for you is another fantastic resource. I will put all of these in the video description as links so you can go directly to those resources. And be sure to subscribe to the Ball Seed YouTube channel. We make videos constantly. We have an entire at-risk crop series covering, I think we're up to, I think we have 10 or more at-risk crops now with full presentations to help you send those plants to market clean. And I'll give a shout out to the Tech on Demand podcast. Again, I'll put all of these resources in the show notes with quick links so you can get directly to them. And Will, I really appreciate you taking the time to go through this refresher. It's exciting that we have Impatiens back. Again, like we've said, it's such a staple for shade gardens. It brings beautiful color. It's a plant that everybody knows and everybody grows. So it's a extremely important crop around the world. And with some control strategies in place, the monitoring that you talked about, and the correct plants, the correct environment, I know that the fantastic growers in our industry can put together beautiful crops, send them out, and really inspire gardeners to use this color in the shade. So, Will, thank you very much for your time. If you have anything else to cover, now's your chance. If not, we're going to wrap up and folks can get back into the greenhouse because it's busy season right now.
Yep. Thanks a lot, Bill.